What's up guys, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel and happy Artsy Fartsy Friday. Today, as you can see, we are going to be reviewing another Arteza product. I am going to be reviewing this 24 set of real brush pens. This is from their premium line, which I recently learned is not their highest end line of products. They also have an expert and I believe a professional line as well, but I think their premium line is by far their most well known. And I mentioned in my Arteza haul video that I have heard of a lot of people who own these brush pens, but I have never tried them myself. And in fact, I don't have a lot of experience using an art supply like this in general, so that this was going to be a little bit of a challenge. Just to recap some of the disclaimers that I've already mentioned in my other Arteza videos, this video is not sponsored by Arteza. They did offer to send me the products for free to review. They did give me a coupon code that is good through the end of May, and they did sign me up as an Arteza affiliate, which means if you go to the link down below and you make a purchase through that link, I get a small commission, but it does not affect the cost of the product at all. So with all of those disclaimers aside, let's get into reviewing these water-based brush pens. As mentioned, this set comes with 24 brush pens in a variety of colors, and it also comes with a water brush pen as well. And I thought this was a really interesting addition to this set. I did want to just make a couple of quick comparisons. First, I wanted to compare it to my Pentel Aquash pen because that clearly seems to be the look that they're going for. It is very similar in size and shape and feel. The cap is a little bit smaller. The bristles are white instead of brown, but I think ultimately it performs basically the exact same way. The brush tip is a little bit longer, but it still comes to a very, very fine point and still has a lot of variety that you can get out of this brush pen. One thing I also wanted to compare it to is the brush pen that was included in the Arteza watercolor set that I also recently reviewed, and I will have that review video in the cards for you to look at as well. This brush pen I was admittedly a little bit underwhelmed by. I felt like the water dripped through the bristles of the brush pen much easier, making it pretty much always a saturated brush, which made it a little bit hard to do some of the fine detail work and really get that vibrant pigment that I was after. So I wasn't super pleased with this. I think it's a little bit less sturdy, so maybe I just squeeze it harder, which is why that water comes through a little bit easier. This was a fine brush pen for quick travel and if you were doing some maybe quick studies on the go, but ultimately it was not my favorite brush pen. Now the brush pen, the water brush pen that was in the real brush pen set, reminds me and performs much more similarly to my well-known, loved, and used Pentel Aquash. So I think if you are looking into some of the water-based brush pens from Arteza, the one in the real brush pen set I can highly recommend, and just the ones with, it looks like these blue bases tend to be just a little bit more sturdy and secure. So that is my recommendation as far as the brush pens go. I was really happy to have this in this set, and it does come into play with some of the different ways that you are able to use these markers. The other thing that came up for me when I was thinking about these water-based brush pens is some of the other art supplies that I have, like the well-known Tombow markers. Tombows have been around forever, and I've had them in my collection at various times in my art journey. These differ actually for several reasons. These have a felt tip nib, so it's a solid kind of piece of material, whereas the Arteza brush pens, as I mentioned in the haul, actually have like individual bristles that mimic much more of an actual paintbrush, which is something that I have not seen a whole lot of. I think it's a really unique quality that makes this art supply very unique. Obviously, unlike the Tombow markers, the Arteza ones are only one-sided, the Tombow markers are double-sided. And the other main thing that I think I was not expecting to find different between these two art supplies is that the Tombow marker in and of itself is basically a standalone marker when dry, meaning when you're not using this marker with any additional water, it still performs like a normal marker. It layers similar to any water-based marker, where if you put down one layer, it might be pretty light. You double it up, it gets a little bit darker. If you really start to build it up, it might start to kind of tear through your paper a little bit. So this, to me, the Tombow is much more of like your standard go-to water-based ink that you think of when you think of water-based markers. The Arteza markers are a little bit different, and I want to get into that, and I think the best way to kind of explain how they're different is just to show you the swatches. So here I have all of the 24 swatches of the Arteza brush pens. One thing I will note, I love the color variety in here, and I think the color variety in a set of art supplies like this really matters a lot more. When it comes to something like a traditional watercolor pan set, I'm less picky about the color range and variety because I can usually mix a lot of those colors myself. With this, you're not really able to mix custom colors on the spot. I'm sure if you were to kind of have a little scratch palette with maybe like some kind of plastic or glass palette, you could kind of scribble some of the ink out and mix it that way. But the way that I used them in this video, I didn't really mix any custom colors. I kind of only used the colors that were in this set, which I was able to do really successfully, I believe. But I really do like the color variety in here. You do get a lot of lights, midtones, and dark colors. You get a lot of neutrals, and you do get kind of a different variety of each color family. So with the purples, you have kind of a warm purple, a cool purple, a dark purple, a light purple. With the blues, I would have liked to have seen a darker blue. I think that that was something that was potentially missing from this set, kind of like a nice royal blue, or even a navy. I would have been very, very happy with. I do like the variety of greens. I like the variety of browns. I like the variety of grays, and one thing that I will note with the grays, just in case you're curious, I feel like the swatches didn't reflect how dark the grays can start out. I feel like swatching these markers was a little bit difficult, which kind of brings me back to the tangent I was starting this conversation with, which is that these brush pens kind of start off dry. Like if you use them without water, you might be a little bit underwhelmed. So we'll just take this color, for example. This is sapphire blue, very pretty blue. And I'll just kind of use the back of this page as an example. But if you were to just put this marker directly on the paper, you might just be pretty underwhelmed. You can see you get a lot of texture in here, but you're not really getting any smooth pigment. It can be difficult to use these just as regular pens without the addition of water. When you do add water, it all of a sudden becomes a lot more flexible, and I think that that's something that is really, really wonderful. But again, unlike watercolors, once you put these down on paper, they aren't quite as malleable right away. I feel like you're still going to see some lines and brush strokes, and that's something that you might have to kind of work around. You're not going to get as smooth of a look as you would with some other water-based art supplies. So just something to keep in mind for the sake of this review. Personally, I like the texture that you get with these brush pens, and I think it was probably ultimately one of my favorite parts of using these brush pens. So just with the note that you are not going to be able to really mix custom colors very easily, and that you're not always going to be able to get those very, very smooth washes, I would like to get into the demonstration piece just so that we can really break down how you can use these brush pens and if they're going to be the right art supply for you. So just like I would any watercolor painting, I'm starting this illustration off very light. I'm trying to build my layers little by little so that I'm getting all of the complexity of a regular watercolor illustration. You can see I went in with that water brush to sort of just wet the paper and prime it to accept this pigment. One thing you should know about these markers is that you have to work a little fast. If you lay down a brush stroke with one of the Real brush pens and you want to layer it and thin it out and get a nice smooth gradient, you better have your water brush pen ready to go to really activate that pigment shortly after you put it down on the paper. If not, what will happen is that brush stroke will kind of dry and set, and it will be much harder to reactivate and lift it from the page. So if you're familiar to working with watercolors and you're used to watercolors that lift easily and blend even after they've dried, this is going to be a little bit of a challenge for you to adapt to your art style. I know I just mentioned working light to dark, and then I went from using this very pale gray to using the black marker to fill in all of the dark parts on the skull. I really don't have any justification for that other than I think the pencil marks on this paper were so light. I really wanted to get those shapes in before I started layering too much and those pencil lines essentially disappeared. But I'm pretty happy with the skull for now. You can see I kind of layered and thinned out just some very light shadows, and it was really easy to do that with the grays in this set. Moving on to the flowers, I really got a sense for how quickly you have to work with these markers. You can see here I'm kind of outlining each individual petal for this flower, and then when I try and go back and blend it out, it's not really budging, and I didn't like how that looked. Because the look of the skull was so lineless and sort of free form, the look of the flowers being kind of outlined and completely filled in just didn't match the look I was going for. So I tried a new approach for the rest of the flowers, and I basically just decided to ignore all of the lines that I had for the flowers and go a little bit off the trail a little bit. I basically just went for a very painterly, brushy style where I would get the Real brush pen really wet. You can see I have a little jar of water there. One of my other favorite techniques that I did with these brush pens was just to dip the pens themselves into a little bit of water, which gave me a very easy to use light wash, and it was a little bit uncontrollable, which is actually something I like. I like that I couldn't quite determine how pigmented the marker was going to be when I set it down. It wasn't until I put it to the page that I really got to see the impact of that marker, and it would vary as I continued to work on that part of the piece. It would start off really light and then build up intensity as the ink seeped down into the bristles again. Or it would start off really pigmented and then it would kind of taper off and get a little bit lighter. It was hard to predict, which might be very intimidating for some of you who are used to controlling a lot of the components of your artwork. But hear me out, I actually think it's really fun. If you can't predict how it's going to look, it kind of keeps you on your toes a little bit, and you can be surprised at how something actually turns out when you can't really visualize it because you can't really predict it. You can see I am layering and intensifying the colors as we go here, and if I don't like how intense a color is, it's really easy just to add a little bit of water and thin it out and then go back over it when the area is dry again. You can also see that I'm layering a little bit of purple into the flowers as well, and I think that just adds an incredible amount of dimension and separates the flowers from just like looking like one big cohesive red blob. ultimately what I want to leave you with is that there's a few different techniques you can use with these brush pens. You can use them as is, dry, quote unquote, where you're just using the brush pen directly on the paper with no added water. You can use the brush pen and then dilute it with water by dipping it into a little bit of water. I will caution you that if you choose to go that route, you may have to wait longer periods of time between layering the color because you're going to have to wait for the ink to seep down back into the bristles. I ran into this issue with the red marker where I had to kind of let the red marker rest for 5 or 10 minutes between layers so that I could build up that intensity again. And I think I might have killed the red marker, which I'll get to at the breakdown of this video. But lastly, you can also use these markers by adding in something like the water pen and diluting it that way. That way you get the full intensity of the pigment in the brush pen, but you also have the ability to dilute it with the water brush as well. And here we have our finished illustration. I have to say it was a little touch and go there for a while. I wasn't quite sure how the flowers were going to render out at the end of this, but I am really happy with the end result. I think the colors layered beautifully. When I look at the flowers, I can see every tone that I laid down, from the yellow to the peach to the pink to the reds, and then especially that purple at the end really added some nice dimension. And I love the way that the colors kind of pooled and it has those ridges around the edges. I think that that is such a cool look. So I'm happy with this, and I think considering the sort of lack of structured lines in this piece was something I was initially very concerned about. I think ultimately this art supply made it so that I didn't need to have those structured lines for this piece to look finished and polished. And I think that that's something that I'm really surprised by, but I'm pleasantly surprised, and I would totally use this art supply again. It was fun, it was interesting, it challenged me a little bit just because I found myself having to work quicker, and I was finding myself having to use the brush pens in different ways depending on what look I was going for. Sometimes I wanted the most pigment right away, and sometimes I wanted a really light wash. It is a little bit tricky when you are trying to use the same color in multiple ways. I definitely ran into that with this red marker here. As you can see, I relied heavily on the red marker for this illustration, and it doesn't seem to have fully recovered from its hard work trying to build up the dimension in these flowers. So something that I would have to bear in mind in the future is that if I wanted to get all of that light wash down, I would have to pretty much do all of that first, wait for all of the ink to head down to the tip of the marker again, and then once that wash is dry, really go in with that more intense color, because trying to use it back and forth obviously didn't really work because I needed this one marker to kind of perform multiple jobs of being both my light wash and my kind of dark pigment, and that just really wasn't, it wasn't up for the job, and I'm wondering if it has in fact run out of ink. I think it's obviously still got a little bit of life in it, but it's not doing so good. So that being said, these markers might have kind of a short lifespan as far as the ink in the brush pen. If you are using them sort of like watercolor markers, you are going to be diluting the ink quite a bit, and that might impact their lifespan. So something to keep in mind, not something I'm particularly concerned about in the future. I think that I will find a workaround for that, and I think now that I fully understand how these markers work and the amount of downtime that they need kind of between uses, I will be able to kind of carry that with me into the future. But overall, I'm really happy with this piece. I'm really happy with this illustration, and I'm happy with the art supplies. I think that they were really cool to use and experiment with. I like that I can get so much variety out of one pen. I think these would be great for on the go, especially with the addition of the water brush pen, which I definitely did use, and I enjoyed using it quite a bit. I think this is a perfect kind of on-the-go travel art supply for something that you might just want to take with and experiment with. If you're doing quick studies of landscapes or anything like that, these would be a great thing to use, and they definitely have my recommendation. So this is a little out of my comfort zone, not too much. My final Arteza product review is going to be way out of my comfort zone and a little bit crazy, and I'm very intimidated, but I'm looking forward to sharing that experience with you all. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you, Arteza, for sending me these art supplies. And again, if you are interested in picking up any of these art supplies for yourself, check the description bar for some more information, as well as that coupon code and affiliate link for you to save some money and also help support the channel if that's something that you're interested in. If it's not, no pressure. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video anyway, and I hope to see you in the next video very soon. But until then, I will see you on the internet.